The smell of damp hay and expired medicine hung in the air like a warning. Inside an old creaking barn in rural Missouri, a horse lay motionless in a bed of soiled straw, breathing in shallow, uneven gasps. His eyes, dark and distant, seemed to see nothing but pain. He hadn't stood up in days. His ribs pressed sharply against his thinning skin, and even the seasoned workers at the auction, men hardened by years of loss, couldn't hide their discomfort. It was as if everyone knew this horse wouldn't live to see another sunrise. Dusty, his name scribbled in fading ink on a weathered stall tag, had been left there to die. Outside, an old pickup truck coughed to a stop in a cloud of gray smoke. The door slammed shut, and Junia Leigh Corbin stepped out, her face tight with determination and something deeper, grief, maybe. Clutched in her hand was a yellowed photograph. Her grandfather standing proudly beside a horse with a distinctive white blaze on its nose. The moment she found that photo buried in a box of old tools, she felt something she couldn't explain. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was a pull. A call. Something unfinished that demanded her attention. Junia walked past stalls lined with strong, glossy horses without even glancing at them. Her heart beat faster with every step, until she saw him. There, at the far end, the horse from the photograph, what was left of him. Her knees buckled, and she dropped beside him in the straw, ignoring the curious eyes of the men watching. Her hand reached out, trembling, and gently touched the warm, sweat-drenched fur of his neck. Dusty stirred. Slowly, painfully, he opened his eyes. And in that quiet moment, Junia swore she saw recognition. "It's you," she whispered, barely audible over the sound of her own breath catching. A heavy boot step echoed behind her. Ezrin Crowley, the man who ran the auction, stood with arms crossed and a look that had seen too many lost causes. His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "That one? He's done, girl. Been passed over by everyone. Even the slaughterhouse said no. You want him, he's yours. Just sign the papers and pay the vet fees. But don't expect a miracle." Junia looked up, eyes red and glassy. She glanced at Dusty, then back at the man. "I'll take him," she said, her voice low but steady. "Even if it's just so he doesn't die thinking no one cared." What Junia didn't know was that Dusty wasn't just a forgotten horse. He was a thread, pulled from a tightly kept secret that had been buried for decades. And now, that thread had started to unravel. If this beginning touched your heart, leave a like, comment if you would have done what Junia did, and subscribe to the channel to follow every secret Dusty still holds. This story is just getting started, and it's going to move you until the very end. The trailer groaned under the weight of history as Junia drove down the winding dirt road that led out of Crowley auction barn. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of Dusty through the small slatted window, his head low, his body swaying slightly with every bump. She'd wrapped him in old blankets and spread fresh straw, but she could still see the way his body shivered from exhaustion or fear, or maybe both. The air inside the cab was thick with silence. Not even the radio felt right. All Junia could hear was her heartbeat and the echo of Ezrin Crowley's words repeating in her head, "Don't expect a miracle." Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't about miracles. It wasn't about logic, either. It was about the pull she felt in her chest when she saw that horse. That mark on his face, the one shaped like a jagged lightning bolt, had haunted her since she was a little girl. It was in that photo. In her grandfather's stories. A horse that had once saved a man's life, he used to say, but he never told her how. Now, her grandfather was gone, taking his secrets with him. And all Junia had left was Dusty, and a gnawing feeling that none of this was coincidence. By the time she reached her grandfather's old property, the sky had turned a dusky orange, casting long shadows across the overgrown pasture. The place had been empty since the funeral. A few of the fences had fallen, and ivy had begun to creep over the porch rails. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the land itself had been holding its breath, waiting for someone to come back. She parked the truck, stepped out, and opened the trailer slowly, half expecting Dusty to have collapsed on the floor. But he hadn't. He stood, barely, legs trembling, but he was still up. "Come on, boy," she whispered, coaxing him down the ramp. It took nearly 10 minutes. Every step looked like a battle. But he came, one hoof after another, onto the soil that once knew him. And when his feet touched the ground, something shifted. Junia felt it. Not in the air, not in her ears, but in her bones. Like the past had just arrived home too. That night, she stayed in the barn with him. Wrapped in an old quilt, Junia sat by Dusty's stall, staring at the photograph under the dim bulb above. There was something in her grandfather's eyes in that picture. Something he'd never spoken aloud. A truth he carried with him until the end. And Dusty? Dusty was the only one left who might remember what that truth was. The following morning brought with it a brittle wind that swept across the Corbin property like a whispered warning. Junia awoke stiff and cold, her back aching from sleeping on the wooden barn floor. She opened her eyes to find Dusty still lying in his stall, his breath steady but faint. There was something both heartbreaking and noble in the way he rested, like a soldier returned from a war no one had spoken of in years. Junia reached through the bars and placed a hand on his neck. His skin twitched slightly under her palm. He was still here. Still fighting. She spent the early hours cleaning out the old barn, the scent of dust and mold thick in the air. Her grandfather's tools still hung in their place, untouched. Bits of rope, rusty horseshoes, and a saddle worn by time. It felt like stepping into a memory. As she swept near the back wall, her broom struck something hollow beneath the floorboards. She knelt, brushed away the straw, and found a loose plank. Beneath it, wrapped in burlap, was a tin box. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened it slowly, almost afraid of what she might find. Inside were yellowed letters, a leather-bound notebook, and a photograph, one she'd never seen before. It showed her grandfather much younger, standing next to Dusty in front of a different barn. But this time, his expression wasn't joyful. It was grim. Dusty looked healthy in the picture, powerful. But her grandfather's eyes, they held something else. Guilt? Fear? She flipped through the notebook. Most of it was weather reports and horse care notes, but buried in the back were a few pages of personal entries, scrawled in haste, written late at night, maybe under pressure. One line leapt off the page. "If anything happens to me, Dusty knows where it started." Junia read it again, and again. Her chest tightened. What had her grandfather been involved in? How could a horse know anything? She stared at Dusty through the slats of the stall, his head barely lifted from the straw. What did he remember? Later that afternoon, a man in a battered blue pickup pulled onto the property unannounced. Junia watched through the kitchen window as he stepped out slowly, looking around like he expected someone else to greet him. He was tall, maybe in his 60s, with deep lines on his face and eyes that scanned the place like it was sacred ground. He didn't knock. He went straight to the barn. Junia's pulse quickened. She grabbed the notebook and slipped it under her coat before heading outside. She didn't recognize the man. But something about him felt familiar, like he belonged to a story she hadn't heard yet. Junia stepped into the cold sunlight just as the man reached the barn door. Her boots crunched on the gravel, startling him. He turned sharply, his eyes locking onto hers with a look that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken questions. He removed his hat, revealing thin gray hair and a long scar running just above his left temple. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind tugged at Junia's coat, but she didn't move. The silence between them was not empty. It was heavy, charged. "Can I help you?" she asked finally, her voice steady, though her heart wasn't. The man took a step closer, eyes never leaving hers. "You're John Corbin's granddaughter." It wasn't a question. It was a statement soaked in memory. Junia nodded cautiously. The man looked past her toward the barn, then back at her face. "I'm Clayton Voss. Your grandfather and we went back a long way." He paused, swallowing whatever words tried to follow. "I heard he passed." Junia studied him carefully. The name meant nothing to her, but the way he looked at the land, the barn, even the porch swing, he wasn't lying. He'd been here before. Maybe many times. She motioned toward the barn. "Why now? After all these years?" Clayton hesitated, his jaw tightening. "Because I saw Dusty's name on the list at Crowley's last week. I didn't believe it could be him. But if he's here, it means something's come full circle." Junia's grip on the leather-bound notebook in her coat tightened. "You knew the horse? Knew him?" Clayton gave a dry, bitter chuckle. "I owed him. We both did." He turned his gaze to the barn. "That horse saved your grandfather's life. And mine. But the truth is, he should have been dead a long time ago. Just like us." She stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the barn. "You're going to have to explain that." Clayton didn't argue. Instead, he pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket and handed it to her. It was a letter, addressed to her grandfather but never mailed. The paper smelled like tobacco and age. Junia opened it, her hands trembling. The first line chilled her. "You swore we'd never speak of that night again. But silence has a price." Behind her, Dusty let out a soft, breathy snort, as if he, too, remembered. The words on the letter burned into Junia's mind long after she'd finished reading. It spoke of a stormy night 30 years ago, a truck that never should have been on the road, and a deal made in desperation. The tone was half confession, half warning. Her grandfather had written in his journal that Dusty knew where it started, and now this man, Clayton Voss, stood in front of her with a story he hadn't finished telling. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper again. Junia gestured toward the old porch. "Sit. Talk." Clayton hesitated, then sank into the wooden chair like someone preparing to bleed out truth. "It was 1993, he began, his voice low and deliberate. "Your grandfather and I were hauling a trailer through a back road just outside Red Hollow. It was raining hard, visibility near zero. We'd been at a place we weren't proud of, a place where bad men sold worse things." He looked down at his hands. "We were young, poor, made choices we didn't talk about afterward." Junia's stomach twisted. She didn't want to hear this, but she had to. "What happened?" "The trailer wasn't empty," he said. "There was a girl inside. Maybe 12, 13. She'd been trafficked. We didn't know at first. Thought it was just livestock." His voice cracked. "Your grandfather lost it when he realized." He turned the truck around and ran it straight into a ditch to stop the delivery. Dusty was in the trailer too. The impact broke the hitch clean off. The horse kicked open the back and got out. That spooked the other truck. We got away. Junia sat frozen. She could see it playing in her mind. The rain, the panic, the screams. And Dusty, breaking free. Did the girl survive? Clayton nodded. She did. John got her to a sheriff 2 towns over. But we never spoke of it again. We knew the men behind it. Dangerous men. Organized. We swore to bury the truth. She looked toward the barn where Dusty lay resting. It made sense now, why her grandfather always treated that horse like family. Why he never let him leave, even when his health declined. Dusty had saved a life that night, and perhaps more than one. But before Junia could ask anything else, the faint crunch of gravel interrupted them. A black SUV had turned into the drive, slow and deliberate. Tinted windows. No plates. Clayton stood abruptly. They found him. Junia's throat tightened. Who? He didn't answer. But the fear in his eyes said enough. What do you think Junia should do next? Confront the truth or run from it? Drop your thoughts below. And if you felt that chill at the end, let us know what you would have done if that SUV pulled into your driveway. The black SUV sat at the edge of the driveway like a predator, engine idling but unmoving. Junia stood, her heart pounding in her ears, watching the tinted windows as if expecting them to blink. Clayton moved in front of her instinctively, one hand reaching into his coat. "Get inside," he muttered, his voice stripped of any warmth. "Lock the door and don't come out unless I say so." Junia didn't move. "Clayton, who are they?" He didn't look at her. The kind of men who don't forget. The kind who made their fortune in fear and don't appreciate unfinished business. He stared at the SUV, jaw clenched. If Dusty's alive, it means someone's been watching. And now they're wondering what else is still breathing. Junia's legs felt unsteady, but her voice held. "We did nothing wrong." "We did everything wrong," Clayton snapped. "We crossed them, we broke their chain, and we never paid for it. Your grandfather spent his life looking over his shoulder. You think he stayed in this empty house because he liked the quiet?" He shook his head, eyes flicking back to the car. He was hiding in plain sight. The SUV door finally opened with a hiss, and a man stepped out, mid-50s, dressed too clean for the country. His boots hadn't touched dirt in years, and his posture screamed authority. He didn't speak, just looked around, then straight at Junia. She felt it like a blow. That stare wasn't curious. It was calculated. He adjusted his cufflinks and smiled, not with friendliness, but with precision. Behind him, another man stepped out, younger, silent. Armed. Clayton stepped forward, blocking their view. "You're trespassing." The older man raised his hands slowly. "We're just here to talk. No need for trouble." "There's always trouble when you show up," Clayton said coldly. Junia's mind raced. She thought of Dusty in the barn, barely able to lift his head, of the notebook hidden in her coat, of the letter in her pocket, all pieces of a truth someone had killed to keep quiet. She took a step back toward the porch. She didn't know what would happen next, but she could feel it. Something was about to crack open. Something that had been buried in silence for too long. And in that moment, from inside the barn, Dusty let out a sudden, sharp whinny. The kind that didn't come from pain, but from memory. The sound of Dusty's whinny cut through the tension like a blade. Junia froze. So did the men in the driveway. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was sharper, urgent, almost alert. Clayton turned toward the barn instinctively, his body tensing. "He remembers," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. The older man in the suit tilted his head slightly, as if intrigued. "You've still got him," the man said softly, a smile twitching at the corner of his mouth. "I wasn't sure. Crowley wasn't either." His eyes moved back to Junia. "You're a stubborn girl, like your grandfather. But you don't know what you're sitting on, do you?" Junia felt her hands clenching into fists. "Whatever this is, I didn't ask for it. I just saved a horse." The man laughed, a low, mocking sound. "There's no such thing as just a horse when he's been a witness to betrayal. Dusty was present the night our shipment vanished. He saw things. And John Corbin kept him alive. Like some kind of insurance policy. But insurance only works if you use it." Clayton stepped between them again, eyes blazing. "Leave. No. Before you cross a line you can't walk back from." The younger man at the car reached into his coat. Junia didn't wait to see what came out. She turned and bolted toward the barn, boots pounding the gravel. Behind her, she heard Clayton shout something, a scuffle, the heavy thud of boots hitting dirt. She didn't stop. Dusty was awake now, standing, trembling, staring at the entrance as if he knew exactly what danger was approaching. Junia grabbed his halter, trying to steady him. "It's okay, boy. I've got you," she whispered, even though her voice shook. But Dusty wasn't calming. He stomped once, eyes wide and locked on the barn door. Junia turned, and found Clayton stumbling inside, a gash above his brow, blood dripping into his shirt. "They're not playing around," he said, breathless. "We've got to move. Now." Junia grabbed the saddle blanket from the wall, but she didn't know where they'd go, how far they could get. Dusty was still weak. The road was long. And someone was clearly willing to do anything to erase what happened that night. She looked into Dusty's eyes, searching for something. Guidance, courage, anything. And what she saw there stunned her, a spark of defiance, the same spark she'd seen in her grandfather's photo. Dusty wasn't done yet. And neither was she. Junia threw the saddle blanket over Dusty as quickly as her shaking hands allowed. The barn lights flickered above them, casting long, fractured shadows across the walls. Clayton was already back at the barn doors, peering through a crack in the wood. "They're still outside," he said. "Waiting. Watching. They're not leaving without something." Junia grabbed the lead rope, looping it around Dusty's halter. "Then we don't give them anything. We get out the back." She pointed toward the rear gate, half-rotted and hidden by overgrown weeds. Her grandfather used to use it when moving cattle in secret. She'd never thought she'd rely on it for her life. Dusty stumbled slightly as they guided him out, but he walked, slow, deliberate, like he understood the stakes. His breathing was strained, but his eyes were clear, locked forward. Junia kept one hand on his neck, steadying him. "Just a little further, boy," she whispered. "Don't quit on me now." Clayton led the way down the side trail behind the barn, through the grove of trees that bordered the old pasture. The sun had nearly vanished, and dusk cast everything in hues of violet and gold. Behind them, the crunch of gravel, heavy footsteps, sent adrenaline surging through Junia's veins. They weren't alone anymore. The men had followed. They were closing in. They reached the edge of the property where the fence had long collapsed. Clayton turned to Junia. "We have to split up. You take Dusty through the woods. There's a ranger's cabin 3 miles east, abandoned since the fires. You can make it if you stay off the road." He pressed a small flash drive into her hand. "This was hidden in your grandfather's notebook. It's encrypted. I don't know what's on it, but if they want it this bad, it's the truth. Protect it." Junia looked at him, stunned. "You're not coming?" "I'll buy you time," he said simply, then turned and jogged back toward the sounds behind them. She didn't have time to argue. Junia urged Dusty into the woods, the branches whipping past them, the sound of breathing, hers and his, filling the silence. Every step felt like a test. Dusty's legs wobbled but held. The horse that had once outrun darkness was now trying to do it again, only this time, not for himself, but for her. Behind them, a single gunshot cracked through the trees. Junia didn't look back. The ranger's cabin emerged through the trees like a ghost, weathered, roof half caved in, windows shattered, but to Junia, it looked like salvation. She and Dusty had been moving for over an hour, and he was near collapse. His flanks trembled, his breathing shallow, his steps dragging in the dirt. Junia pushed open the door with her shoulder, guiding him inside. The floor creaked beneath his weight, but held. She shut the door and dropped the latch, her hands trembling. She didn't know if Clayton was alive. She didn't know if the men were still following. All she knew was that the flash drive in her coat burned like fire. She found an old towel, dampened it with melted rainwater from a cracked bucket, and wiped the sweat from Dusty's coat. He leaned into her touch. For a moment, they were just girl and horse, broken, breathless, but not defeated. Not yet. As night swallowed the forest, Junia lit the one surviving lantern hanging from a nail on the wall. She pulled out the flash drive and stared at it, heart pounding. Her grandfather had hidden it in his journal, behind scribbled entries about hay weight and hoof rot. But someone had wanted it badly enough to threaten her life. That meant whatever it contained mattered. She found an old battery-powered laptop in a supply chest. Miraculously, it turned on. When she inserted the flash drive, a single file appeared, RCH footage 1993 movie. She clicked it. The grainy footage showed a small cabin. The inside was dimly lit. Her grandfather stood beside a table, bruised and furious. Across from him, two men she didn't recognize, and one she did, the man from the SUV. Younger, thinner, but with the same cold eyes. He was yelling. Her grandfather was yelling back. Then the camera panned, and Dusty appeared, roped outside the window, stomping, restless, agitated. Something had happened right before that moment. Then came the sound of a girl crying. The camera shook. A struggle. And then the screen went black. Junia stared at the blank laptop, heart racing. The footage was a piece of a puzzle. Proof that her grandfather and Clayton had uncovered something ugly. Something they couldn't stop but refused to be part of. And Dusty. He had been there through it all. Maybe he had been the reason that girl had survived. Maybe he had broken through the chaos, through violence, just long enough to give them a chance to run. She turned to look at him. He was lying down now, eyes closed, his breath slow. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead gently against his. "You carried this for all those years," she whispered, "and you never let it go." Then, from outside, the snap of a twig. Someone was here. The snap of the twig echoed like thunder through the fragile silence of the cabin. Junia froze, her body pressing protectively against Dusty's as she reached slowly for the lantern, dimming the flame. Her heart pounded in her throat. Whoever was out there wasn't lost. They were hunting. She slipped the flash drive into her pocket and stood, moving toward the window. Moonlight revealed a dark silhouette near the tree line. Just one man. The older one. The one from the SUV. He wasn't rushing. He knew she was here. Junia stepped outside, her voice firm despite the fear tightening her chest. "I know what you did," she called out. "I've seen the footage. I know about the girl. I know who Dusty saved. And I know what my grandfather died trying to protect." The man stepped into the clearing, hands out but eyes sharp. "It's over, Junia. There's no court that'll take that video seriously. 30 years old. No sound. No names. You think you're going to ruin me with a ghost?" "No," she said, taking a step forward, "but I'll ruin your silence." From behind her, Dusty let out a hoarse, broken whinny. The man's eyes flicked toward the cabin. For the first time, something cracked in his expression. Not fear, but recognition. Memory. "That damn horse," he muttered. "We should have put him down the night it happened." Junia's voice shook with fury. "But you didn't. You couldn't. Because he ran. Because he fought. Because he remembered." Sirens pierced the night. Red and blue lights flashed between the trees as two sheriff's trucks barreled down the narrow trail. Junia didn't blink. She'd sent the footage to a friend at the local paper hours ago, just in case. Clayton had taught her one thing that mattered more than any weapon. Proof survives when people don't. The man turned to run, but it was too late. Deputies tackled him in the mud. Junia stood motionless as it all unfolded, justice crawling up from the grave of her grandfather's silence. Later, as dawn broke through the mist and the forest came alive with birdsong, Junia sat beside Dusty one last time. His body was still, his breath shallow but peaceful. She rested her hand on his neck, her eyes filled with tears that didn't come from pain, but release. "You were never just a horse," she whispered. You were a witness. You were a survivor. And you were family. Dusty let out a final exhale, soft and complete. And in that quiet morning, as the world moved on around them, Junia understood. Some truths live in silence, until someone is brave enough to give them a voice. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe. Every life matters, and every truth deserves to be heard. Help us keep these stories alive.